Thank you, Serena, and thank everybody who's joined us today by video conference or by phone. This is the City Manager's Public Safety Review first broad community meeting, and we are really glad to have all of you here to participate with us tonight. And we want to make sure that we give you a roadmap of how we're going to spend our time tonight. My name is Saul Saravia, and I am part of the technical advisory team that is supporting the city manager's office in this public safety review. And tonight I'll be serving as a facilitator for the meeting. On your screen, you should be able to see the breakdown of our time tonight. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to spend a few minutes hearing from a couple of our elected leaders. Our mayor is here and Councilman Small is here. And they will do a welcome and overview. And we will then be moving to an update from the city manager's office. Assistant City Manager Serena Wright will provide an update regarding some of the work that's already been done as we've come past the first 30 days of the motion that created the public safety review. And we will hear some of the remaining parts of the process that all of you should be aware of and hopefully participate in. And from then, we will then go to our Culver City Police Department Chief, Chief Manny Sid, who will provide an overview of key aspects of the organizational structure and some key initiatives that align with the motion that was included in the review. After Chief Sid, we will have a guest presentation from UCLA Professor Dr. Kelly Lytle Hernandez, who, among many things that she does on the campus, runs the UCLA $1 Million Hoods program and will be presenting some public safety data and describing that program through that in this part of the agenda. So we welcome her and thank her for joining us in this process. After we hear from Dr. Kelly Lytle Hernandez, the members of our technical advisory team who are leading the data collection and data analysis methods will also give us a little of the summary of what they're doing, what is involved in the data that they collect from the Culver City Police Department, and some of the specific things that they will be looking at and including in their own assessments and recommendations around efficiencies and around the mandate to look at possibilities for reallocations of various duties and services and how to improve those that exist within the department. We will then move to a question and answer session and give all of you an opportunity to ask questions of any of the people who you've heard from tonight, and also share any thoughts. We are going to encourage people who are on the video conference to include comments and questions in the chat, but to reserve our question and answer for questions. This is an opportunity to ask questions of experts who have looked at the importance and the various ways to meet community needs, community safety needs, and to look also at the importance of racial equity and justice in pursuit of community safety. So we will encourage you to do that. And I'll say a little bit more about our logistics in a little bit. But I'll close by just saying, I'll close the overview of the agenda by just saying that our last part of our meeting agenda would be to just describe for you the timeline, the arc of the work, and what the next steps will be before we close. So that is our meeting agenda. And I just wanted to pause here to, as facilitator, make a couple points around logistics and then around our agreements and expectations regarding our engagement. The most important thing for you to know is that the meeting is going to be recorded and posted to the Culver City Council website. So this will be available for you to review if that you didn't get to, or you want to go back and examine a little bit more. We will be making this available on the city website. All of the comments and the questions that are posted on the chat throughout the meeting, for those of you who are on the video conference function, can be and will be saved, and they will be transmitted to the task force. So anything that you feel you want the task force to know at this point in its review process, feel free to put it into the chat. Again, for those that are questions, if you would like to be heard, you will be on mute until it is time for our Q&A at 7:20. And during that period, you can signal the question that you would like the city manager's office to consider. And we will be looking at those questions and also the questions from people who are on the phone. We would like to give them an opportunity to also weigh in. And if you are on the phone tonight, we want to tell you that you need to press *3 to be able to indicate to us that you have a question that you would like to make. In the interest of hearing from as many voices as possible, we will have a 1-minute limit for the asking of your questions. So if you could just make sure to be succinct as possible to be able to do that, that would be fantastic. That is regarding the process for getting the engagement going tonight. And this is one of the primary objectives for the council, which is to make sure that there was robust and multiple avenues for community input to come into the review process that the city manager's office is anchoring. We also just want to affirm the way that we want to be with each other. The city manager's office is not going to be served if we all happen to be on the same page and say the same thing. But we want to encourage the ability to lift up various perspectives on central questions that are part of this review. And we want to do that in a way that affirms who we are as a city. And we want to start that by just saying at the outset that our understanding around the community's interest in this area and the animation to do the review was that we all have a goal of ensuring that everyone feels safe in the city and community, and we want to hear what community safety means from various standpoints. What that means is that we will necessarily have distinct experiences and perspectives based on our standpoints, and we want to create the best environment for all of those perspectives to be heard. And the most important thing that we want to ask is that in sharing yours, you not discount the experience of anyone else or anyone who has had the opposite experience of yourself. I think if we can agree to the spirit of Culver City and to some of those ground rules in our engagement, then I think we'll be doing just fine for tonight. So with that, I am going to pass it on to our mayor and Councilman Small for a welcome and their own comments. Mayor, first.
Thank you, Saul. I would like to welcome everyone to our Public Safety Review Committee meeting today. As you all know, in recent months, the nation has seen an outpouring of grief, anger, and questions regarding social justice and how our police functions in society. We have all been affected by the death of George Floyd and others across the country. And it is an important moment to listen and reflect upon the concerns of our community members, especially when it comes to the relationship between police and people of color. I hope that this meeting will serve as an informative dialogue for everyone, so that we may find practical and meaningful solutions to the future of policing in Culver City. I'm joined on this call with my colleague, Councilmember Thomas Small, who serves with me on the ad hoc liaison police subcommittee. Today, we are also joined by Acting Culver City Police Chief Manny Sid, and as you have heard, we also have Dr. Kelly Light-Hernandez, Saul Sarbia, and I appreciate them being here with us this meeting and want to thank other staff who are working with this issue, particular Assistant City Manager Serena White and Acting Assistant Police Chief Jason Sims. As you may be aware, the ad hoc police liaison subcommittee recommended that the City Council authorize the City Manager's Office to review all public safety services delivery, and approaches. The city manager then formed a task force consisting of internal group working with consultants and incorporating members of the public, who will provide data and community input that will inform the city manager's recommendations for city council's consideration within 90 days. There were two tasks that the council asked for: a plan to review and potentially reallocate public safety resources, services, and budgets, and the review of the police department's use of force policy. Again, thank you for being here. I look forward to today's discussion, and I now turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Thomas Moll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This task force, led by the city manager's office, has a uniquely important role and is in fact vital to the future of our community and our city. In only about 6 weeks from now, the city manager needs to offer to the city council initiatives that are feasible, practical, and actionable in the short term. But this is just the beginning. These are only baby steps on a much longer journey. But they need to be real steps, a demonstration of our intention, of our seriousness, of our resolve. This can't just be another blue ribbon panel that has many discussions, but in the end does nothing. We will continue this process in our general plan update, but we need to take real action right away to demonstrate that we are serious about this and not just marking time until the furor dies down. Because this time, the furor is not going to die down if we don't take action. What can we do right away to help our police offer better, more efficient service and to streamline the scope of their responsibilities? There are many examples that I have spoken about before and that others have spoken about. You know, just one example might be parking enforcement. You know, could parking enforcement be done by a different department? Maybe code enforcement. Could someone else, you know, without the salary of a police officer and without a gun, issue parking tickets in our neighborhoods? That's one possibility. But tonight, I want to speak to the council's charge to the city manager and community to engage in this process in good faith and with robust and respectful dialogue. Over time, our expectation is that the city manager and eventually the general plan process, the general plan update process, will generate a range of options, including ultimately possibly even a potential option that could achieve as much as a 50% budget reduction. But certainly that's an aspiration over time. And each of these options will be arrived at by drawing on data generated by technical experts and on the community wisdom from our residents and others who benefit from these city services. None of the city manager's recommendations will be enacted without also being debated and voted on by the city council. It will be our job on the council to decide which parts of the recommendations make the most sense for our city and the next phase of this journey. I also want to speak to the polarized atmosphere that we find ourselves in, both nationally and locally. Even locally, there has been a lot happening over these past few days and weeks, and a lot of noise and rancor on social media. Some of this surrounds the appointments to the Human Relations and Equity Committee that is just being formed. And some of this another hotspot is the issue of the staffing in our jail, which is really just a holding area where individuals stay until they're moved to the actual county jail. These issues are side issues, and they will each be resolved in their appropriate venues on the appropriate time schedule. These side issues can't be allowed to distract us from the absolutely vital work we are doing tonight, the issues this task force is analyzing over only the next 60 days. This is a very short time. We can't afford any distractions. So it is my hope that we will not be addressing those side issues, those separate issues tonight, as they are not within the purview of this task force. We can't run out the clock without achievements. We need to find the right things to do right away. At a national level and a local level, there is a clarion call for change, and we need to address it appropriately, both immediately and over the long term. It is important that as a community, we affirm that we can have a productive dialogue with each other through this public safety review. During this process, we on the Council will continue to learn from the broad diversity of perspectives on these important questions. Tonight is one step of this longer process that we are just beginning, one in which we will practice how we want to be with each other, even when we are in disagreement. We want to streamline and right-size our police department so they are not required to carry out tasks that they are not suited for and that they probably don't even want to be charged with. Like, for example, maybe the dog catcher. As important as that job is here in Culver City, where we love our dogs, maybe the dog catcher doesn't need to be a highly trained and highly paid police officer. And maybe this kind of restructuring will enable our police department to focus even more carefully on the vital aspects of protecting public safety that only they can do. Working collaboratively with Chief Manny Sid and our excellent officers, we can do this. We can demonstrate to ourselves that we are a community that can work together. And as we have done in so many innovative ways, we can be a model for all of the Southland. We can enable our city administration and our police department to continue to evolve and to design itself to become a department that will proudly serve all of our community, a police force that is valued and admired as it deserves to be by all of our community. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Councilman Small and Mayor Erickson. With that, I'm going to ask Assistant City Manager Serena Wright to move into the City Manager's update on how the review has been going and some of the things that we've learned. Serena.
Perfect. Thank you, Saul. And really on behalf of the City Manager's Office, I want to again thank everyone for attending this important dialogue tonight. In my portion of the presentation, I want to take some time just to provide an update so everyone has an understanding of kind of what's been happening behind the scenes since we have been given this directive by the City Council to provide the recommendations on reimagining public safety services in the city. I'll provide you with an overview of the project outline, the outreach and engagement that we've done so far, and also what's planned over the coming weeks. And then I'll finally provide you with information on what other organizations within California are doing and the research that we have found on different alternatives that are being explored. And I should state that I'm also trying to operate the PowerPoint at the same time, so we'll see if I can do both. So just going into the project overview, as Mayor Erickson stated, the directive that was provided to the City Manager's Office included 1, to review the police department's resources, services, and responsibilities, 2, to review the police department's use of force policy, and then 3, finally, to come back with recommendations on changes for both of those areas for City Council's consideration. The City Manager's Office put together a team comprised of city staff members and outside consultants, some of which you will meet tonight. You've already met Mr. Sarabia. We began developing a project work outline that would ensure that we hear from as many diverse perspectives, opinions, and experiences as possible. The primary group that we've been working with is the Chiefs Advisory Panel. This group was established earlier this year and includes about 21 individuals from the community representing a large segment of the Culver City, and they each come with a very broad background. In addition, we're also meeting with the General Plan Advisory Committee, the Finance Advisory Committee, and also city employees that have completed training through the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, also known as GARE. This is in addition to hearing from the broader general public in meetings like we're having tonight. City Council specified that they want to ensure that we hear from a wide range of groups so that all those perspectives are being considered as we are looking at formulating different recommendations. So as I mentioned, the project partners also include some outside consultants, Saul Sarabia with Solidarity Consulting, And he's mainly assisting with developing the approach and timeline for the project, doing some data collection and synthesis to elevate racial equity and social justice considerations in the review, as well as facilitating meetings and helping the city manager's office develop recommendations for the city council. And then you'll also hear tonight from the California Public Safety Management Group, also known as CPSM. They are performing data analysis and data collection and analysis for us, performing our workload and deployment analysis of the police department, as well as assisting with identifying opportunities to reallocate services and resources. And as was mentioned, we have been giving a 90-day timeline to bring back recommendations to the City Council. We are now at the end of our first 30 days. The past 30 days have really been spent designing the project, developing timelines and touch points, and gathering data related to policing in Culver City, and also evaluating reform measures that other organizations are considering. So the next 60 days will involve analyzing all of that data and developing and assessing potential recommendations to present to City Council. So now I want to touch a little bit on the outreach and engagement efforts that we've made thus far, and then also everything that is planned. I think as both council members mentioned, community outreach engagement is a City Council priority, and that is the reason that it is so significantly woven into this process. We've got a whole host of meetings planned within 90 days, so it's a very ambitious, fast-moving project. So as I mentioned, the project team is working primarily with the Chiefs Advisory Panel, and this group is functioning in advisory capacity to the City Manager's office. They're in a role to provide feedback on the data and information presented, and then this feedback is taken into consideration as we move through the project. To date, we've met with this group twice. The objective of the first two meetings was to provide a foundational understanding of the project, the actual role of the committee, and a basic understanding of the police department's current operations. We've also met twice with the GARE team to begin the initial review of the use of force policy. So over the next 60 days, we'll continue to meet both with the Chief Advisory Panel and also the GARE team, as well as the Finance Advisory Committee and the General Plan Advisory Committee. And some of these meetings will be public meetings, and I encourage all of you to participate in those meetings and continue to provide your input. At the end of this presentation, there will be a slide that shows you all of the upcoming meeting dates. And all that information is also, it'll also be on the project webpage, and the web page address will also be included at the end of the slide, so you'll have that as well. So our other engagement efforts that are planned include targeted focus group meetings and also a community survey that has been developed with the goal of collecting, again, the many perspectives of not only the Culver City residents, but also visitors to our city. And the survey will serve three primary purposes. So it was designed to not only inform the city manager's recommendations on the reallocation of police resources, but it's also going to provide information to assist us with the review of the use of force policy. And I think it'll also be helpful for the General Plan Advisory Committee as a new policing element has been added to the General Plan update. The survey is expected to be released in a few days, and it will be available both in English and in Spanish, and it will be distributed widely, both electronically and print copies. And the survey responses will be anonymous, and all of the responses will be received and summarized by an outside firm. The results of the survey, it'll be posted on the web page that I mentioned, and it will also be presented at a public meeting. In fact, the next public meeting that will be held with the Chief Advisory Panel and the General Plan Advisory Committee, and that meeting is going to be held on September 17th. So now as we get into the research that we have done on not only our internal services, but what is happening outside of Culver City. So we've done a significant amount of research and study on what organizations throughout the U.S. Are doing in relation to policing in their cities and towns and counties. We've also looked internally at, whether there are opportunities to reorganize some services. City Council recently expanded a contract with Special Service for Groups, also known as SSG, for increased mental health services support. And in case you are not aware, SSG, it's a nonprofit health and human services organization, and they really focus on providing community-based programs to address the needs of vulnerable communities. We currently use SSG in our senior center for social work support. And now what they'll be doing is augmenting the existing mental health services provided by the LA County Department of Mental Health Law Enforcement Teams program. And this program uses a covert response model that pairs a clinician along with the Culver City Police Department mental health team officer to respond to calls involving mentally ill, high-risk individuals or individuals experiencing homelessness. So the expansion of this program is going to provide Culver City with 3 additional days of coverage, and that will then mean that we'll have a full 7 days of coverage. So 3 days with SSG and the other 4 days with LA County Department of Mental Health. And I believe Chief Sid is going to go a bit into this as well. The project team has also held meetings with a group known as CAHOOTS, the Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets organization. And this is a mobile crisis intervention program that's located in Oregon. They're dispatched out of the Public Safety Dispatch Center, and they respond to emergency nonviolent calls such as suicide intervention, substance abuse, and then also responding to issues of people experiencing homelessness or other mental health crises. The response team consists of a medic, either a nurse or an EMT, an emergency medical technician, and also a mental health professional. And we've also initiated some discussions with our own communication center just to understand if they are equipped and interested in providing dispatch services for non-police responses. This research and the discussion will also continue over the course of the project. And at the end of the 90 days, we may have some recommendations in relation to this. So in looking at some other public agencies within California, there are a number that have taken on the type of review that we are doing here in Culver City. So for example, the City of Berkeley, they have approved a proposal to create a new transportation department to oversee traffic and parking enforcement. In addition, they're also removing police from responding to calls for people experiencing homelessness or mental health issues. And this is very similar to what the City of Los Angeles is also looking into. The City of Oakland, they are looking at a mobile assistance response team, very similar to what I described happening in Oregon with CAHOOTS. And they've also created a task force to take a deeper review of the public safety programs within their city with the goal of reallocating police funds into other community programs. Also, just looking at Los Angeles Unified School District and also the County of Los Angeles, they too are reevaluating public safety that are located within schools and on local transit. The Board of Supervisors is also exploring the creation of an alternate 911 system for mental health and social welfare calls. And they've also announced the closing of the Men's Central Jail. So that's just naming a few around us. And then if we look very locally to our neighbor in Santa Monica, they've also established a public safety reform advisory committee. And this committee is structured very similar to what we are doing here in Culver City with the group providing input and feedback to the city manager's office. And the city manager will then be making a recommendation on revising and reforming the police department's use of force policy, and also making changes to Santa Monica's budget in relation to divesting and investing in other community programs. And I will just add this other bit of information that I think next to Santa Monica, I feel a little bit fortunate as I have a whole 90 days to work with the team and come back with recommendations to the City Council, whereas in Santa Monica, they've been given the very short time of 6 weeks to come up with recommendations to the Council. So I think with that, I'll wrap up my presentation and just turn this back over to Saul.
Thank you, Serena. As folks are hearing the updates, any suggestions about things that you have read about or are interested in making sure that the city manager looks into, please drop them in the chat. And then, of course, specific questions about what you heard, hold on to those for the Q&A section. Okay, we will now move to Chief Sid, who will be providing a picture of our existing police department and key overviews of the structure of the organization, as well as some description of where under his leadership the organization is planning to go and some of the initiatives that relate to this particular motion. Chief Sid.
Thank you, Saul. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for this really important process and a really important step as a part of that process. I'm Manny Sid, the acting police chief. I just want to take a very brief second, just a little bit about me and my background, being new to this position now for a little better than 2 months. I'm a first-generation Cuban American. Grew up in the Long Beach area. My formal education includes myself possessing my bachelor's degree in political science and my master's degree in public administration and organizational leadership. And I've been with the department now for approximately 15 years. Next slide, please, Serena. So I just want to start a little bit to give, for some of our folks on the call, and I think joining us tonight, have a decent understanding of our organization, maybe some not as much. So I just want to start with a brief overview of the organization and then move forward from there. So CCPD is a full-service municipal police department. The resident population here in the city is approximately 40,000. However, it is worth noting, pre-COVID and I suspect post-COVID, our average daytime population here in the community shoots up significantly. And on any given day, we probably average somewhere between 300 to 400,000 daytime, visitors and as a daytime population. Along with that, as many as you know, just trying to get around Culver City again pre-COVID, and I suspect post-COVID when that time comes, the amount of vehicular traffic that we get through this community is significant, averaging in excess of probably 1 million cars a day that pass through this city. The police department is broken up into, we call them 3 bureaus, also known as divisions. Those 3 bureaus are the Operations Bureau, the Investigations Bureau, and the Administrations Bureau. Each of these bureaus is overseen by one of our captains or the assistant chief, one of our bureau commanders. Starting with the Operations Bureau, which is overseen by Captain Troy Dunlap. Operations really consist of patrol and our traffic sections. Kind of the face of the organization of most any police organization. These are our women and men who are out in blue uniforms, patrolling the streets, answering calls for service, most importantly, doing traffic enforcement, dealing with mutual aid requests, as well as obviously crime prevention. Also within our Operations Bureau, we have some of our non-sworn position or non-sworn services, such as animal services, parking enforcement section, which again is handled by non-police officers, non-sworn positions, and our jail operations also ran out of our Operations Bureau. On average, the police department averages probably about 50 to 55,000 calls a year, calls for service every year. Next, we have our Investigations Bureau that's headed and overseen by Captain Sam McGivey. Our Investigations Bureau really encompasses all our detectives, do all investigative work, follow-up work, including the filing and assisting in the prosecution of cases with the DA's office. Our forensics unit, regional task forces that we're a part of, our crime analysis, to really focus in on an intelligence and technology-led investigations. Also encompasses our special victims unit, as well as our youth diversion program, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in just a minute. Our investigations section or bureau probably takes on about 6,000 investigations per year, give or take on average. So significant workload that they deal with to follow up on the back end of these investigations. Lastly, our Administrations Bureau, which is overseen by the Assistant Chief, Jason Sims. Upwards of 50% of the staff in this bureau are going to be non-sworn or professional staff. This bureau encompasses our professional standards unit, also known as internal affairs, our PIO, community relations, records section, property section, our personnel and training section, a significant amount of workload there that goes along with the ongoing compliance and training associated with any police department handled out of our training section. Again, section of the department that carries a significant workload. Our professional standards units probably average over the last 3 or 4 years about 20 generated complaints every year. We are currently on pace to double that at this point, and those include both internally generated complaints as well as citizen complaints that are generated externally from outside the department. Records section also stays incredibly busy with things like our public records requests, so on and so forth, handling as many as a dozen a day, hundreds over the course of the year. Next slide, please, Serena. So just a little bit on our current status and budget and staffing allocations as where we currently stand. The department's 2021 fiscal year budget, as we currently have it going forward, is about $44.7 million. That's a reduction of about $2 million coming out of last year, represents about a 4 to 5% cut of the last year of the department's budget from last year. The brunt of those cuts came from the unfunding of a handful of positions through this last budget cycle. Those positions included 4 police officer positions, 1 jailer position, 1 parking enforcement officer position, and 3 community service officer positions. Fortunately, all 9 of those unfunded positions and eliminations were able to be accomplished. Now, the police department's budget, 90% of it is essentially covered by personnel costs, salaries, and benefits, with approximately 10% of maybe what we refer to as discretionary costs. So again, 90% being for staffing. After those unfunded positions and cuts, we are currently have for a budgeted complement of 113 sworn staff members, including the chief of police's position, all the way down to our newest officers, 40 professional or non-sworn staff positions. And then we also have a complement of approximately 30 volunteers. Of that 30, 11 are reserve police officers, and then a significant amount of volunteers and patrol that assist around the police department and serve in a significant capacity, but obviously are not a part of our budgetary obligations in being volunteers. Next slide, please. So what I really want to spend some time talking about this evening are some of the new initiatives and changes that the police department is really focused in on and trying to enact, in really taking a hard look at the police department and the organization as a whole, and really trying to see what we can do to make it better and take it in a fresh and new direction. Obviously, first and foremost, starting with myself through the organization, we're fully immersed in support and engaged in the Public Safety Task Force being headed by the City Manager's Office. Case in point, why we're here tonight, and obviously working alongside with some of our different community groups, including the CAP, DARE unit here at the city, as well as the consultants that are part of the group, and fully immersed and engaged and supportive of that process. That said, that police organization, our police department, as we go through this process of the task force in these initial 90 days and then the months and years to follow, as the council members touched on, is still operating and trying to provide a service, the highest level of service every single day. So both in my position and with some new leadership at the organization, incumbent on us to really take a full evaluation and assessment of the police department. And that's what I've been a part of doing, particularly over the last couple of months, but also having had the opportunity and coming up through the ranks and having some real insights to the organization. And those insights include having a good understanding, I think, of some of the things that, quite frankly, we do really well as an organization, as well as some things that maybe we don't do so well and areas that we need to improve on. To get to some of those organizational strengths, I'd say that, humbly, we provided a high level of service. That level of service was, in regards to things like response time, which we, fortunate to have a really impressive one, particularly when you compare it against other agencies of under 4 minutes for an emergency response and maybe 9.5 for a non-emergency response. Maintaining a low crime rate. Culver City is fortunate to be an incredibly safe city, particularly when you consider that we're surrounded by the city of Los Angeles. and maintaining a case clearance or the ability to solve crime once it does occur, case clearance rates that are very impressive and well over the national average. But then also looking at as an organization, understanding those things that we need to do better and areas that we can improve. Some of those things, data collection. In a day and age where I think it's more important than it's ever been, data collection is something that we need to improve on. It's something I've been directing a lot of staff time and hours to and making some real efforts to push forward on that. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and that really leads itself to a component of transparency, which has to be a part of the cornerstone of any organization. And there's some real strides that we can make there from top to bottom. And then maybe lastly, maybe most importantly, rethinking our policing philosophy as a whole. This really kind of is significant to me, and we'll talk a little bit about it. I think that the impacts about not so much the framework of policies, as important those things are, and data collection and some of these other framework things. I think really, for me, most impactful part of an organization is the philosophy of which that we kind of employ, how we go about doing our jobs. So myself and the command staff and the leadership of the organization have really, both in the present and moving forward here, have kind of identified 4 areas of focus that we really want to try to impact and make some real measurable change in. Right at the top of that list is, again, rethinking our policing philosophy. And that's probably most notable in how we patrol and how we deploy for patrol. The second part, and we've talked a lot about it and we will continue to, is the expansion of our mental health services and resources. The 3 is improved data collection and overall transparency of ourselves as a policing organization. And then lastly, our efforts to enhance partnerships and advancing our community's youth. Next slide, please. So in rethinking our policing philosophy and how we deploy our patrolment, what we really are looking to do is to humanize our police officers. And one of the ways that myself and the command staff have identified something that's actionable and can be done in the short term is really looking to get police officers outside of their police cars. Every last one of us at one point or the other has had that polarizing, unease moment where a patrol car gets in behind you, lights go on, pull you over. Heck, even now as a police officer, police chief, police car gets behind me and that happens, there's a moment of uneasiness and, and that feeling of, oh man, what did I do? I think by getting police officers out of their cars, having them park their vehicles, walk and bike, and talk with our community members and get engaged, I think it serves to do a few things. Number one, the amount of community engagement and that opportunity to humanize police officers to our community members, and in turn, humanize our community members to our police officers, and taking out something that I think exists in that barrier, that is a police car, and seeing police officers drive around. And it really serves as a barrier, I think, in a lot of ways, in the amount of engagement that an officer can really have, and in turn the community can have with our police officers. It gives an opportunity to kind of take on a shared problem-solving approach, and it really speaks to that philosophy that I'm speaking about. And I think traditionally as an organization, much like most policing organizations throughout our country, the focus of our patrol ranks in particular is really enforcement-driven. And that approach kind of ends and starts with the focus to go out there and enforce. I'd like to see us take a shift and go towards a philosophy that's more partnership-centered or more community-centered in how we go about that approach. And again, I think getting out of our cars, getting our folks out on bikes, getting them out on foot, particularly as our city grows and it grows vertically, I think there's a real opportunity to get our folks out of those cars, stay equally as effective with the things that we do well, like response time and deterring crime, but yet improve on our engagement with the community. And then naturally, as we get our police officers out of our cars, I think one of the other things it does is it curves, it really impacts the amount of traffic stops we're making, and impacts that uncomfortable, oftentimes polarizing encounter, particularly for folks of color and folks of different segments of our community that have been impacted in different ways and in different levels by policing. And I think, although it doesn't necessarily solve all those issues, I think that's one of those measurable, actionable moves that we can make that really starts to speak to the heart of some of that encounter and in starting that encounter into really sometimes difficult, polarizing dynamics that oftentimes revolve around that traffic stop. So again, really thinking about it, we've kind of termed it this park, walk, and bike talk. philosophy, really wanting to kind of recenter our approach and really reshift that focus from being so enforcement driven and being more partnership center driven, and knowing that if we, learn and get to a place where we're working more hand in hand with our community, that will in turn make us equally as effective with deterring crime, enforcing laws, but also really keeping our engagement with our community and that relationship at the forefront of everything we do, because it's invaluable. Next slide, please. Expansion of our mental health services and resources. Our CCPD currently has a MET team comprised of 2 full-time police officers that are advanced trained in dealing with mental health related issues and subjects in the field. And they are partnered with one Los Angeles County Department mental health clinician. The clinicians with us 4 days a week. The officers cover 7 days a week span. Currently, we average somewhere in the ballpark between 5 to 10% of our CCPD calls for service contain some mental health. We average 150. It's a psychiatric hold that we place every day. Our CCPD MET team works hand in hand with St. Joseph's and many of the other nonprofits around the area. And I think from my end has been an incredible success. Many of you have met Dr. Dan. It's a co-responder model that I think has been incredibly successful. Gives us a little bit of both worlds, and really not only allows us to take a social worker clinician and put them at the forefront of dealing with some of these social issues, particularly in this case, the mental health services, and to a degree our unhoused services, compares them with a police officer. It also allows us to provide a level of safety, be able to act when some of those encounters become volatile, because they oftentimes are. In many instances, those encounters with some of our mental health related folks in the field and unhoused also do sometimes, unfortunately, involve a level of criminality involved in them. So this co-responder model for me really gives us all the tools on the tool belt to be able to respond to effective and efficiently. Next slide, please. So one of the focuses and one of the goals that we've actually been working on for some time and really want to kind of double down on is to work to expand that co-responder model that we already have in place and have a structure for. Again, as I touched on, I think it's kind of best of both worlds. It allows us to really come to an issue and a challenge with numerous tools on our tool belt, but with having this co-responder model, oftentimes that responder model also really extends to our fire department in a co-response in dealing with these situations. Co-responder model, you see it in different parts of our country, Colorado, many cities around our region here in Los Angeles County use it. Again, we have that structure in place. It puts that clinician kind of at the forefront of it, but pairs them with a police officer. And I think that combination, again, effective in an efficient manner. That said, the goal is, as we touched on earlier and the assistant city manager touched on, we currently have one clinician that's on loan to us, if you will, fully staffed with us, being funded by the LA County Department of Mental Health, but it's just one. And we'd like to see that grow to 2 or 3 or so we can have 7-day-a-week coverage to match up with our officers. And these folks really they're out in the field, they're a crisis response type model, they're responding to calls in progress with that same significantly impressive response time, if you're asking me, to be able to get out there in minutes, triage an incident and critically respond to it. So different options that we can go through, continuing to work with the Department of County of Mental Health to see if we can get more clinicians, maybe strengthening our pitch to get more by being able to maybe offer at some point the possibility of maybe funding those extra positions. I believe that would make our pitch in the county a little stronger. And maybe other options is taking on being able to staff full time out of the city, out of the police department or any other department in the city, the homeless coordinator's position out of the city manager's office, to be able to get another couple of clinicians on staff full time that again would be able to pair with police officers and really work on and really grow this model that we already have in place and a structure that we already have to support that. Next slide, please. Improve data collection and transparency. One of those things that organization, and I think for some time we have not done well, the standardization and to be able, the ability to collect, store, and ultimately report out data. A lot of pieces of the pie here, different technology, sometimes constraints, as well as just being able to effectively collect data, store it, analyze it, and in turn report it out. So it's an effort that my administrative staff will tell you that I'm just really pushing them to the absolute edge on to work at just light speed to really kind of get us to a place where I feel comfortable. One of the probably right at the most notable of those kind of tasks that we're taking on under this umbrella is RIPA, the Racial Identity Profiling Act. This is an act that's designed to collect data and analyze and be able to report back on folks that police officers are self-initiated stopping, be it through traffic stops or pedestrian stops, including race, gender, age, so on and so forth. An agency our size to be in compliance with this needs to be up to speed by April of 2023. Previously, our organization was kind of on track to line up with that timeline, if you will. In light of where we are as an organization, understanding and not losing sight of the fact that this is a pivotal time. This is something that really speaks to, I think, one of those central issues, not only in policing, but certainly for our organization. Really kind of put the pedal to the metal with this, and I'm happy to report that we are currently in a work process and working hand in hand with the DOJ to get in full compliance with them. And by January of 2021, such at the end of this year, we'll be fully compliant with DOJ, reporting out to the DOJ that data. And we're also hopeful and planning, and we are on track to already be collecting that data internally by this fall. Next slide, please. Also along that transparency front and data collection is our use of force data and our complaint reporting data. We put out something we call our monthly report, really sat down with staff looking to revamp that, really kind of freshen the information and the information that we're putting in there, making it more pertinent, I think, to what our community wants to hear back and we want to report out on. That's something that over the next month or so, even in the weeks to come, we're gonna publicize some of those significant changes we made in there. And a couple of those really start with our use of force data, including how it breaks down and it pertains to race, as well as, again, our complaints, internally generated citizen complaint, and associated findings. Next slide, please. And then lastly, our efforts to enhance partnerships and advancing youth. We have a really impressive, something that I know as an organization we are really proud of, and I am as well, being one of the first cities and departments in the county, partnered with the county a little over a year ago in our youth diversion program. Over the last year, we've already diverted over 40 youth into that program. We partner with the New Earth organization, an incredibly successful program and a really great partnership that we have with them, both with the county and New Earth. Something that I like to see us grow significantly, with the ultimate goal being that we can significantly increase the amount of youth we're diverting out of the criminal justice system and sending into this youth diversion program, and really giving these folks an opportunity to redirect their track as young adults, keep them out of the criminal justice system, as I talked about. And I think that has an overarching effect, certainly on the futures of our community, and oftentimes really impacts the segments of our different segments of our population, particularly our youth of color. There's been talk about the school resource officer. I think there's value in that. It's kind of at the forefront of responding to calls for service in and around the high schools. Unfortunately, sometimes some of those calls do involve some level of criminality, even if it's low level. And I think there's value in continuing that. But I also think that the school resource officer shouldn't be the face of our department's engagement with our youth at our department. So I want to work with the school district, school board. I've had some preliminary conversations about this, about what that can look like going forward, whether it's officers, maybe not in uniform, and that engagement with our youth doesn't exist and involve around a police officer in uniform responding always when something's wrong and there's a call for service, but that more that relationship is one built on dialogue, mentorship, engagement, training side by side and hand in hand, and really involve ourselves, some of which we've done in the past and more of what I like to see us grow, philosophies that line up with kind of our Brother's Keeper, My Brother's Keeper program and initiatives, and really see us kind of grow with the ultimate goal, again, advancing our youth and our community, understanding that that's the future, not only of this community, but really of our nation and our society, and something that I feel strongly about. So that's a kind of encapsulation there of some of the things I wanted to touch on. Obviously, I'll be available for any questions you might have. I covered quite a bit there in a relatively short period of time. But back over to Saul.
Thank you so much, Chief Sid. I appreciate it, and I think it's great for folks to have a description of the direction of the department and some idea of its overall structure. At this point in the meeting, we are going to now move to one of our neighbors and actually local resident experts on issues that relate to this motion. Dr. Kelly Lytle Hernandez is a professor of history, African American Studies, and urban planning at UCLA, where she holds the Thomas E. Lifka Endowed Chair in History. She's also the director of the Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies at UCLA, one of the nation's leading experts on race, immigration, and mass incarceration. She is the author of the award-winning books, Migra, A History of the U.S. Border Patrol, and City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles. And she is the director of $1 Million Hoods, a nationally recognized big data research initiative that maps the fiscal and human costs of mass incarceration. For her historical and contemporary work, Professor Lytle Hernandez has been named a KCET PBS Local Hero and also received has been named a MacArthur Genius Fellow nationwide. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Lytle Hernandez. We really appreciate you being here and learning more about $1 Million Hoods and the data you all have collected on Culver City related to a central part of our inquiry, which is race equity and community safety. Take it away.
Thank you, Saul. Good evening, neighbors. It's really wonderful to be participating in this conversation with everyone. I was asked to really come in and share a little bit about what I do at UCLA with the $1 Million Hoods Project, and then to apply some of the work that we're doing to CCPD data. So let me tell you a little bit about that project first, and then we'll get into CCPD. So $1 Million Hoods is what we call a university-based but community-driven research project. We map the fiscal and the human costs of mass incarceration here in Los Angeles in particular, but up and down the state of California as well. We do this by partnering with community organizations that are led by and peopled by the individuals who have been most impacted by policing, the people who are most likely to be incarcerated, the people who are formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated. So what we're doing is we're bringing the wisdom of the experience of being policed to big data to interpret the numbers and tell the stories of what's happening. We do this in two ways in particular. We map how much LA County is spending per neighborhood locking up local residents. And then we issue what are known as rapid response research reports that identify new trends in policing in local municipal police departments. So that's a general description of what we do. You can check us out at milliondollarhoods.org. Now, why do I do this work? Oh, next slide, please. As a historian, I want to give you a little foundation of how I understand this moment that we're all living through and what we're trying to reckon with at this moment. So many of you may be familiar with these graphs that are on the screen. Something dramatic, something historical began to happen in 1970. And what that is our rate of incarceration in the United States literally began to skyrocket past historical norms. Not only is what we began to do historically unprecedented, but it's also globally unparalleled. No other country in the world, industrialized modern nation, incarcerates, cages human beings at the rate of the United States. So what happened in the late 20th century and continues in this current moment is both historically unprecedented and globally unparalleled in terms of its impact around incarceration. And the burden of this has fallen most heavily upon particular populations, namely African Americans and indigenous communities. So that's the third graph that you see there, where the rate of incarceration for African Americans, young African American men and women is extraordinarily high. At this point, this should all be information that all of us know. We've been talking about this for many years now. Next slide. The way that many of us are thinking about this as scholars, as organizers, is that what mass incarceration really is is it's the third and current epic of Black life in the United States. That the Black journey, the Black experience here began with enslavement, moved into the period of racial segregation or Jim Crow. And then after the Civil Rights Movement, there was a massive backlash against that rights movement that led to the rise of mass incarceration. So it's really important to understand that mass incarceration is not just that crime is happening and then law enforcement responds and people go to jail and prison, but really it's an entire infrastructure and regime that restricts rights. It damages people's opportunities to get employment. It causes a wide range of health epidemics. So there's this sort of whole bag of consequences that come with over-policing and hyper-incarceration that have damaged the possibilities and the conditions of Black life, and is really the definitive regime of this current era. So this is why this matters. This is why the killing of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd incited a revolt of the size that we are seeing. It's not just about the police killings. It's about policing. It's about incarceration. It's about parole and probation and fines and fees and all of the impact that this has upon the conditions of life, frankly, for all of us, when punishment is our response to a wide range of social crises, but in particular for Black folks. Next slide. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, great, but that's a problem for the South, right? Enslavement, Jim Crow, that's really what happened to the South, and maybe had some pieces of it in the West and the North. Perhaps that's true, but Los Angeles and California have very long histories of racial inequity, certainly beginning with the criminalization of our indigenous and Native communities, Tongva and Gabrielino communities. But also, since 1950s, Los Angeles has operated the largest jail system in the United States on Earth. So we really are ground zero for this crisis that we're all reckoning with at this moment in the country. I want to give you a couple of resources if you wanted to learn more about this. The Bible for Understanding Mass Incarceration as the New Jim Crow, of course, is Michelle Alexander's work. I have written extensive history of policing and incarceration. You can see that in City of Inmates. Then another extraordinary scholar is Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and her book Golden Gulag explains California's history with mass incarceration.
I think you're frozen.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So we know that LA is really one of the ground zeros for incarceration. One of the great things that's been happening in the last few years here in LA County is a real reconsideration of our investments in policing and incarceration. So, for example, $1 Million Hood shows that in some neighborhoods, we're spending more than $1 million per year locking people up. In some neighborhoods, in fact, it's tens of millions of dollars are being spent in our public money to lock people up, largely on low-level charges. What if we redirected that money into the social services that we need to really address key issues? So what has been happening across Los Angeles County, and Serena dealt with this a little bit, is a process called Alternative to Incarceration. For the last year, we've been meeting in community and with the county to devise an intercept system where we will really don't need so much policing, so that homeless folks will be getting the services that they need. Young people will be getting the mentorship and support that they need, employment opportunities, development opportunities outside of policing. We're looking at redesigning the 911 system. We're looking at shutting down Men's Central Jail, as Serena had talked about. There's a wide array of options on the table that LA County is now moving forward with to create this alternatives to incarceration, which is really a process about ending our commitment to mass incarceration and investing in the social services that all of us need, and really addressing this third epoch of Black life in a way that we've never done in this country. Next slide. Okay, Culver City. So what we do at $1 Million Hoods is we collect police data, arrest data in particular, and jail data. We do this again across the county. We clean that data, we prepare it, and we work with community members to interpret that data. From the CCPD, we submitted a Public Records Act in 2018. So we've been working with this data for a little while. We received 22 categories of arrest data in particular for 5,100 individual arrests made by the Culver City Police Department between January 2016 and July of 2018. So that's the data that I will be using tonight. The data categories that we receive are varied, but include name, age, place of arrest, time of arrest, gender, race, home zip code, charges, and charge category, and more. What I'm going to present to you tonight is our analysis of this data. It's initial, it's provisional, we're continuing to work with it, but a big part of our process at $1 Million Hoods is working with community on the data analysis. So at this moment, I definitely want to thank POC for Change. We met over the weekend, we talked about this data, and they really helped me to understand some of the data points that we were finding. So thank you, POC of Change, for engaging in the process with us. So next slide. So from this data, we found many things that are quite familiar in policing across Los Angeles, across the state of California, and across the country. That when you add up all of the charges, the majority of charges that people are being arrested upon are misdemeanor charges. So we often have this sense of policing that it's addressing core violent issues, right? Well, the majority of arrests, majority of charges are traffic related. There are stops that don't result in any kind of arrest, and they're misdemeanors. Felonies really kind of sit at the top and are small. Next slide. The arrests by gender by CCPD, again, quite typical. The majority of arrests are male. Next slide. This too is typical. The people who are most arrested by CCPD are typically quite young. So if you look here at the graph where it's really striking upward, that's the 18 to 25-year-old group known as the transitional age youth. In police data across the county, the state, and the nation, this is the age bracket that is most arrested. So there's nothing striking here. This is quite typical and quite common to see this surge and then drop across the age brackets of arrests. So next one. Okay, so this is the one that we're here to talk about tonight, right? Policing and racial equity. So from the data that we've received from CCPD, 37% of the arrests during that time period were of African Americans. 35% of the arrests were Latinx folks. 20% were white folks, and 8% other. Largely API and largely South Asian from our eyeballing of the data. So we'll talk about this. Next slide, please. Now, this is the piece that is unique. When we looked at CCPD data, what we found is that the vast, overwhelming majority of people who are arrested by CCPD are not Culver City residents. 86% of the people who are arrested by CCPD recorded an LA zip code. An additional 5% of the people were written down as being so transient, houseless, or homeless. That means that upwards of 90% of the contacts resulting in arrest by CCPD are of people who do not claim a Culver City resident. This is hugely important, and this is a bit of an outlier. I haven't seen this quite before. We're still dealing with the Santa Monica data, so maybe it looks similar there. Now we got to bring this race data together with this residence data to really understand what's going on here, or begin to get an understanding of what's going on here. So next slide. Now, when you want to understand impact of policing, you've got to do it in comparison to a baseline population. So here what we're doing is we isolated the arrest of Culver City residents, and we're comparing it to the Culver City population. And what you see is that in the data, 20% of Culver City Police Department arrests of Culver City residents are African Americans, at a time when African Americans comprise about 10% of the Culver City population. So African American residents of Culver City are being arrested at rates higher than their population. This is also true for Latinx community members, residents of Culver City, and the opposite of true for other folks, API in particular, and white folks are under-arrested in comparison to their presence in the population. So this is one way that we begin to understand the racial impact of CCPD. Next one. Now, the chief had mentioned that Culver City has a high number of people who are here during the day, the daytime population, or people who are passing through, and that is certainly true. So we try to figure out some other ways to think about these racial disparities that are not only in relationship to the Culver City population. So if you look at this chart, and for the people on the phone, I'll read it out a little bit. Among people who are not residents of Culver City, who are arrested by the CCPD, 40% of those arrests, nearly 40% of those arrests are of African Americans. Now compare this to the African American population in the communities that surround us. African Americans are less than 10% of the LA City and the LA County population. And then we developed and we worked with another UCLA faculty member, Pavo Munkanen, who is also a Culver City resident, I believe, on another proxy for understanding the baseline population. And what we did is we looked at within 3 miles of Culver City, what does that population look like? And why do we do that? Because there's evidence that about 50% of the trips that people take on a daily basis are within 3 miles of their home. So we use that as a baseline population. And even when you use the 3-mile baseline population, again, African Americans are being arrested at rates much higher than their population. So it doesn't really matter how you look at it. That's what I want to make clear here. You're looking at the city population, the Culver City population, the county population, the 3-mile population. Let's find another baseline. African Americans are being disparately impacted by Culver City policing and disproportionately arrested. Next slide. Now we have to look at that age bracket, right? Where so many of these arrests are happening. So for folks on the phone, 80% of the arrests for transitional age youth, that's 18 to 25, are Black and Latinx young folks. So let me say that again. In that age bracket, where a good number of the arrests are happening, 18 to 25, 80% of those arrests are Black and Latinx young folks. Next slide. So let me give you a quick data summary before we get into some more information. So here what we have is most arrests in Culver City are for misdemeanor offenses. CCPD disproportionately arrests Black and Latinx residents of Culver City. Again, Chief Sid and I were talking about this before. If we did not find racial disparities, that would make Culver City Police Department an outlier. This is common across the region, the state, and and the country. There is nothing exceptional here. CCPD most disproportionately arrests Black non-residents of Culver City. And Black and brown youth are, I can't see it here, a large number of the transitional age youth arrests. So that's a quick data summary. Let's move on into what all of this means. Next slide, please. Now, so you're like, okay, well, great. So a lot of people are coming into Culver City doing terrible stuff. And so we need this really strong police department, right, to fight back, to keep us safe. And we all want to be safe. Neighbors, we all want to be safe. I think that is something we all share in common. And I hope that we're really seeing that in one another, that we are all fighting to be safe. The most frequent charges in the data that we received from CCPD among the arrests were the following: theft, driving on a suspended license, drug possession, warrant, possession of drug paraphernalia, and a DUI, driving under the influence. Next slide, please. What does that look like in terms of felonies and misdemeanors? Among the theft category, 99% of the arrests that were made in the data that we were given were misdemeanors, not even felonies. They were misdemeanors, very low level. That's up to $950 of value of the item that was taken or items that were taken or accused of being taken. Next slide. When we further break down the theft charges, 88% of them are for shoplifting in particular. Next slide. And this, Mayor Erickson asked for this, so we provided it. From our quick look at the data, at least 22% of the theft arrests occur at the Westfield Mall. So they're fairly concentrated. Next slide, please. Now let's go to the second most frequent charge in the CCPD data. That's driving on a suspended license. 98% of those charges were registered as misdemeanor charges. Next one. Now this is important because you might say, well, people are driving and doing maybe driving under the influence, and then they get caught and they don't have a license. So it's just an additional add-on. But in fact, 94% of the arrests that we found in the data for driving on a suspended license were single charge arrests. They were the singular cause of that arrest. So they're not add-ons to something else. Next slide, please. Okay, now we got to break down these most common frequent charges in the CCPD data by race. And here I want to point out something really, really interesting in the data. In the top two, theft and driving on a suspended license is where you see the greatest number of African Americans, greatest percentage of African Americans being arrested. And you see the lowest percentage of African Americans being arrested on a drug possession, possession of paraphernalia, and the lowest percentage on DUI. Now, what does all of this mean? And we're still working through this, but let me share with you where we're at right now. Next slide, please. One thing is really important to understand about policing and the world in which we live today, not just policing, but every institution, right? Every interaction, is that a whole set of implicit and explicit biases inform our practices. All of us, this is not just the police department, all of us are living with the long legacy of white supremacy in this country that has operated like a DNA in our system and trained us to understand the world in which we work. And I want to lift up the work of actually a fellow MacArthur fellow, Jennifer Eberhardt, who's a professor at Stanford University, who's written extensively about implicit bias, explicit bias, and how it shapes people's understanding of crime and what has happened. So when you think about the calls that CCPD is receiving for theft charges at Westfield Mall or wherever it might be, you also have to understand that those calls are coming through a filter of implicit bias and explicit bias that is allowing people to see some crimes and not see other crimes. So there's a filter by which CCPD is receiving calls and responding to calls around theft in particular. Next slide, please. And actually in this slide, I will post it, but you can go and you can watch Professor Eberhardt's incredible TED Talk on this issue. And I encourage you to do that. And throughout this piece, if you go back and you look at the slides, I'm providing you documentation and resources to do further reading on everything that I'm talking about here. So thanks, Serena. Next slide. Now, here's a big deal, right? And this is what I was trying to get at earlier about the system of mass incarceration. And we all interact with it in different ways. The police do not control the system of mass incarceration, but interact with it, contribute to it in very particular kinds of ways. So there are collateral consequences to every arrest, and they range from if it's a felony, for example, a drug felony, losing the right to vote while you're in prison. So it has political consequences. Perhaps it is losing rights to housing support, losing rights to education, federal education loans, again on drug felonies, but even down to the misdemeanors. There's a world of collateral consequences that come with every arrest. And I want to talk about that for the suspended licenses, but this also goes for theft and the other charges we talked about earlier. Again, the police don't control this, but we all contribute to this. If you are convicted of a suspended license charge here in Los Angeles County, there are several consequences that might come your way. For example, and this is data that comes from an actual conviction charge here in LA County. This was a conviction that was handed to somebody. Quote, if you are not a citizen, you are hereby advised that a conviction of the offense for which you have been charged will have the consequence of deportation, exclusion from admission to the United States, or denial of naturalization pursuant to the laws of the United States. So if you are arrested and convicted of driving on a suspended license charge, the arrest of which can be largely driven by racial bias. You will or you may suffer consequences if you are a non-citizen, immigration consequences. Also, you'll see in this charge that this person was placed on probation for a period of 36 months. We're on probation, on parole. Your constitutional rights, your Fourth Amendment rights in particular, are limited. So here are constitutional impacts. Next page. Continuing with this person's punishment, the initial fine that they received for the driving on a suspended license was $300. But in addition to this, there is a world of fines and fees that come with charges. So in this case, this person, in addition to $300, was assigned a state penalty fund assessment of $870, a $1 night court fee, a $60 criminal fine surcharge, a $40 court operations assessment, a $30 criminal conviction assessment, a $4 Emergency Air Transportation Act fund assessment, $10 citation processing fee, a $15 warrant assessment. If the person was unable to pay this amount of money, they could perform, quote, 10 days of community service, 10 days of unpaid labor. So the total amount that the person had to pay was $1,480 for this. You also are not able to operate a vehicle without this license. And even when your probation is up, you have to pay $120 to get off of probation. So this is this world of collateral consequences that happens when someone gets charged with a driving on a suspended license. It's much the same for theft and other charges. Next slide, please. So from looking at the CCPD data in its isolation, right, we talked about those summary findings earlier, but understanding how it operates in this moment, this era of mass incarceration, I would argue that Black people are the most disproportionately impacted by policing in Culver City, especially youth and non-residents. Our Latinx residents also experience a significant disparity in arrests. Misdemeanors comprise a majority of arrest charges, but even these low-level charges and their collateral consequences negatively impact the conditions of life disproportionately for Black folks, for Black life. So, Councilmember Smalls opened up talking about this moment, the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others is a clarion call. It's really, we're reckoning with so much more than just this moment. We're reckoning with hundreds of years of history. And I'm wondering, I'm hoping as neighbors and as a person who chose to live in Culver City, and I love living in Culver City, I know that we are good people. That I know. We might disagree with each other. I haven't looked at the chat recently, but I know we're disagreeing with each other. But I do believe that we have the capacity to work together, to honestly, to directly engage this moment on the arc of time, which is really about finishing the Black freedom struggle, finally. If you have any questions about some of the material shared tonight, we are working to release a Culver City Police Department report, but for the additional material that I have spoken to, next slide, I did provide a list of readings that people can look into when it comes to the long history of enslavement, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. Some recommendations that people have made about how we can envision ourselves out of this moment, out of depending upon policing and punishment as our principal response to a series of social crises. And about these issues around fines and fees and how this problem is not just in places like Ferguson, but it's really everywhere, here in California in particular. And then lifting up the work of one of our residents, our neighbors, John Kent, who's written quite extraordinarily, and I speak as a historian here, a historian of Los Angeles, has really done quite powerful work unmasking the history of white supremacy that's right here in our own community. So thank you very much. I look forward to talking with everyone. Chief Sid, I appreciate the presentation that you gave and the vision that you're putting forward. And I look forward for all of us working together to building a stronger and safer community for all of us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lytle Hernandez. We are now going to move into the question and answer section of our meeting. And I want to encourage again, folks who are on the video conference to highlight questions they may have for any of the speakers who have spoken so far, and to the city manager's office to put those into the chat so that we can do what we've been doing is scanning some of them. And then I'd like to give an opportunity for anyone on the phone to also remind them that they just need to put in *3 if they'd like to speak. I'd like to start with a couple that we've been able to see as you all have been speaking. One for Dr. Kelly Lytle Hernandez, and then the other for you, Chief Sid. Dr. Hernandez, there's a question about the focus on and the way that in your research, driving with a suspended license appears, right, as a key basis for arrest. And I think this person's question, I think, is one that a lot of folks have, which is they think about driving without a license as an individual responsibility and act. And so I think the question is how to help understand what is structural about that, the category that you highlighted here. So I'll ask you to think about that and then answer first, since you just finished your presentation. And then for Chief Sid, more than one person wanted to know if you could, in general terms, describe what does advanced training look like for the mental health officers? You referenced sort of advanced training, and if you have any information to share with them about that or where they can get that information. So if we could start with you, Dr. Lytle Hernandez, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's so important to this conversation. So I would also direct you to some of those readings I put in the end, but many driving with a suspended license charges begin with a basic traffic citation that someone cannot pay. And when you cannot pay your traffic citation, it can accelerate and lead to you losing your license. And then you get busted for driving without your license. And these fines and fees only pile on top of each other. So why would someone continue to drive without their license when they know that they've lost it, when they did not or could not pay a fee? Well, people need to get to work, right? People need to take their children places. LA is a commuter city. People need to continue to engage in their lives. So that is the structure behind it. And one of those links that I provides you some maps that shows you the incredible overlay of poverty and driving with suspended license charges. That really helps to ground our structural understanding of where this begins with a traffic citation, the inability to pay that traffic citation that then leads to the revocation and the consequences.
Thank you. Okay, Chief Sid.
Yeah, following up on the, thank you all for your question regarding the Met officers. So to begin with, as a part of base curriculum in the Academy for all our officers, different post-required trainings in regards to mental health, there's going to be a baseline there for all our officers. They're going to receive hours. I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of about 40 hours in regards to mental health related training while they're in the Academy. In regards to our Met officers, our two selected officers that work alongside Dr. Dan, our LA County mental health clinician, they kind of have that, as well as department-wide for, again, all our officers. We put them through kind of a co-training that was put on by the city of Santa Monica. They're one of the kind of original departments in the area that had a Met model, kind of set the bar for it. We had an additional 40-hour training department-wide for the folks a few years back. That was, again, led by Santa Monica's team that included a clinician and their officers. And then our specific two Met officers, I believe, take on an additional, on top of that, an additional 40 hours dedicated directly at, dealing with kind of crisis response in working with a Met, clinician and in regards to mental health training. And then it's also worth noting that, particularly for our two Met officers, they get in a police car, sit in an office every day, working side by side by a professional in this area, and work alongside Dr. Dan every day. So they have this on-the-job training above the sitting in a classroom type setting and going through that type of formalized training, working alongside a clinician, a doctor, licensed clinician in that, and the ongoing training that they get through Dr. Dan, they in turn spread back to the department, is an ongoing kind of venture.
Thank you, Chief Sid. Another question for Dr. Leto Hernandez. Folks are wondering why violent crimes and gun crimes don't appear in the data that you presented.
Sure. We typically at $1 Million Hoods focus on the top and most frequent charges where sort of the bulk of police work is happening on a day-to-day basis. When we do the broader one, and I encourage people, if you have more questions about the data, put them into the chat. As we develop our report, we'd be happy to consider all of those questions. Absolutely. That's why we didn't deal with those. I would say, though, if you look at CCPD's monthly reports, all of that data is reported there. What we wanted to do is also fill out a broader understanding of what's happening in the world of arrests, not just the most serious crimes.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Councilman Small, there's a question of just gaining clarification regarding your description of the instruction to the manager's office around the final recommendations, and whether or not the expectation is that there be one of the options that includes and articulates what a 50% reduction look like or not.
Thank you, Saul. We definitely should be looking at what a 50% reduction would look like. We always spoke about that as an aspirational goal. As I mentioned, this process is going to go on for a long time, and if we can truly be innovative and find a way that the police department can do its most important jobs with a much reduced budget, I think that's a fantastic goal. To be able to actually do that in a practical way in the next 60 days doesn't strike me as very realistic. It's certainly something we should look at, but I'm really hoping that in these next 60 days, we can have options that are realistic that we can act on, at the end of the 60 days. So that's that.
Thank you. Dr. Leto Hernandez, there's a question around whether or not you're also going to be looking at some nearby jurisdictions like Santa Monica or West Hollywood that are in the same area that Culver City is in.
Sure. We are, like I said, a community-driven research project. So when communities reach out to us, as you have reached out to us, that's when we do our work. We have begun working with Santa Monica data. It was quite hard to get access to. As Chief Sid had mentioned, police departments across the county, across the nation are really struggling with data and data management and making it available. And I do not mean this, well, I guess it's a general criticism, but certainly not a CCPD. I'm trying to explain that CCPD is in a similar position as many police departments. So yes, we will be looking at more of the smaller police departments, mid-sized police departments, and perhaps we'll get a sense of how CCPD compares when we do that work.
Thank you. And to that point around the data you did present tonight, folks are wondering if your presentation will be available either on the project site or if they go to your site at $1 Million Hoods.
Yes, we will be issuing a report once we conclude our community conversations. We will issue a formal report. But the slides that I provided tonight, I don't know if the city's putting them up anywhere. Those will be available. But please know that what we've provided so far is initial and provisional. The report will be final.
Got it. I want to just pause there and see if our Assistant City Manager Serena Wright would like to highlight any questions before I move on to the ones that I see. I want to make sure that we're capturing anybody who's on the phone.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up with the chat, Saul. I think you've gotten most of the questions that are in the chat. However, there are a number of individuals that have their hands raised and would like to speak. Before we get to them, I just want to respond that all of the presentations that were shown tonight will be up on the project website, and we will provide that email address to everyone before the end of the evening. And Saul, do we want to have CPSM provide a quick commentary on what they're doing for the city?
That's right. Well, we're going to hear now from the data analyst team to describe how they approach this kind of an inquiry regarding police staffing generally, and then what they're going to be doing here on this project with the city manager's office. CPSM. Will it be Dove?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dove Chelst with the Center for Public Safety Management. We're a team that gets hired by cities to look at their police and or fire departments around the country, and we've been doing it for about 12 years now. So for Culver City, our study is going to have two phases. The first phase is a data analysis, and it focuses on the department's operations bureau and paints a picture of what the department does on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and just an annual basis. And we're looking at everything that the department has done in 2019, and we gather that information from the 911 center. And we've already begun that process in July. We've gathered all the information from RCC 911, and we've begun analyzing it. But along the way, because different departments and different 911 centers may still use the same software differently, so it's very important for us to communicate with the 911 center, with the departments, to make sure that we're interpreting the information correctly. So we're in the process of really discussing what we have with both of those agencies to make sure that what we say is valid. At the same time, there's a second phase to our study, and that uses a team of 3 subject matter experts, all from Southern California, and they use our data analysis, but at the same time, they also request about 100 documents from the department, and as they receive them, they're reviewing them, discussing it with the department, and after the data analysis will be available, they're also going to visit Culver City to observe the department in person. So that's where we are currently with our study.
Thank you for that, Dove. There is a question regarding the scope of the study, and the question is obviously to the full team here for working with the city manager. Will you be looking at, there's a lot of questions being asked. Will you be looking at the police contract, overtime pay, and other pay categories in addition to salaries as part of this data analysis?
Well, okay. Short answer is yes. Longer answer is my part focuses on what the patrol officers do during the day. So what they do is independent of whether they're getting paid overtime while they're doing it. But yes, absolutely. Contracts, everything.
Got it. Thank you. If there are further questions related to the data analysis that the Center for Public Safety Management is doing, also feel free to post those here on the chat. And with that, I will come back to you, Serena, to see if you working with the IT person to go through the list of folks waiting, because I don't know that I can see a queue.
Sure. I'll call the names out. First, we have Mark Lipman, and I'll unmute you now. And Mark, just a reminder that we have a 1-minute time limit. So whenever you're ready. and we can't hear you. Mark, are you there?
Hello, yes.
Okay, yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
hello?
Go ahead.
Yes. When I think of public safety, I think of things like guaranteed housing for everyone who is homeless in our society. And when I hear that we're just going to change who responds to these calls, yes, we need trained social workers to respond, not police. But I think this is missing the point. What we need is to get the money from the police into housing so we can directly house people and not keep them on the street. That is real safety. Keeping people on the street is not safety. Now, our Committee on Homelessness has already passed a direct housing pilot program, and it's been sitting on at City Council since February. And for every police officer that we hire, we can directly house 10 people who are homeless in permanent supportive housing. We can end homelessness. The plan is already on the table. My question is, when are you going to fund things that actually respond to the needs to make everyone safe? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Serena, is it fair? Can you hear me okay? Mark's question, I think, raises whether or not the city manager is able to access existing work. Either he's referencing the homelessness committee. I know that there's also the general plan update task force that has been looking at public safety. And so I think it would be good for folks to hear how the city manager's office can draw from some of the existing work across the city, across these committees, in coming up with recommendations and maybe work they're doing with some of those other entities.
And for me, Saul, you're cutting out a bit, so I didn't hear the question. Is that directed to myself or to the City Council?
It was directed to you around in the review. If you're able to, if you're collaborating with entities across the city that might already be looking at some of these issues. So I know you referenced some of the work that you were doing with the existing homeless service provider. I know there's a committee on the general plan update. So I think this question might be coming up for a lot of people that may be serving on other committees where there's information available to the city manager's office. And I wonder if you can say something about the ability to collaborate with or take from some of that, particularly on the general plan update and his question around the other committees that exist.
Serena, maybe I can try to answer that question. This is City Manager John Nachbar. An advantage that the City Manager's office has is that, we sit, in the key nexus point in the city. So all of these committees and recommendations and different perspectives inevitably all eventually impact and influence the thinking and strategy of my office. So the short answer is yes, we will be taking them into consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Nachbar. Okay, Serena, I think we can go to the remaining list.
The next person in the queue is a call-in user. The prefix of the phone number is area code 818-515, and I will go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, my name is Marina. I'm a resident of Culver City for the last 10 years. Just wanted to say I appreciate the presentation. And it's great to see data to understand the scale of the problem. I'm excited to see data on how the police force is spending their time. And I did ask a question about if we have a sense for when, we might reconvene to get to see that. Otherwise, I think right now I'm also curious if we already have a list of some of the different potential solutions we're considering, so that as we get that analysis, it can help us prioritize where we might see the biggest impact to actually move funds. Because I joined a little bit late, but the first thing I heard was really around focusing on humanizing the police, which to me makes it sound like the problem is with the perception of the police, and that the problem that many residents have been raising doesn't exist, and that concerns me. So I want to make sure that we're still really keeping ourselves focused on how we can shift our resources to best serve all members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. I think
it's premature. Yes. I was just going to say, I think it's premature to talk about any recommendations at this point. We are 30 days in, and understanding that we have a short timeline, but we are still in that evaluation phase. So we don't have any recommendations outside of what was presented in the presentation to share.
So can I jump in here just really quickly? So this is Kelly Lytle Hernandez, and I would encourage people to look at, and I provided the link in the slides, the Care First, Jails Last, Los Angeles County Alternatives to Incarceration report that came out earlier this year. And that's county-wide, but there are 144 recommendations in that study about what we need to do county-wide to reduce our dependence upon policing and incarceration as responses to homelessness, to unemployment, to lack of youth support and development. So that's, if you're looking for ideas, you can look out to the county, certainly. And then I know the city and Serena and others are doing their due diligence to study what's happening countywide, statewide, and across the country with alternatives.
Thank you. Serena, do you have more folks on the queue?
Yeah, so next I have Hilton Creed for Heidi Creed. I'll unmute you.
Thank you. One of the ways we can reach out to people among us who are suffering from mental illness is to provide them access to community mental health centers. These would be caring centers where they can share what's on their minds with others in group settings and get help. The groups would be led by honest, caring, knowledgeable and wise and insightful psychologists, as well as psychiatrists, who are also there to support them with medication. Social workers should be employed as well to connect participants to other resources they need, such as Section 8 housing. The centers could also provide nurses and dietitians. Centers could also offer opportunities to enjoy art therapy, dance therapy, pet therapy, poetry, and singing together. Interested volunteers and others could help establish the community health center or centers.
Thank you, Ms. Creed.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to the next caller. That's Alejandro Arroyo.
Yes, hi. My name is Alejandro Arroyo. I'm a third-generation Culver City resident and raised in the Mar Vista Gardens housing community. And my question is more towards the police chief. Based on the data presented by Professor Hernandez, that non-Culver City residents and Latinx youth are some of the most impacted community with the PD, as well as based on personal negative experiences in dealing with CCPD. How does the department plan on addressing residents on the periphery of Culver City, such as Mar Vista Gardens residents? Can there be a maybe face-to-face interaction with this community, some surveys or something that would encompass this part of the community, since the data has shown that non-residents are the most affected. And I also wanted to say that if we are really trying to address the issues facing CCPD, it's non-residents who are facing them. So we need to stop pretending that CCPD's actions should only be measured by its effect on residents and only focusing on the city as if it exists in a vacuum. Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandro. Thanks for the question. Actually, so as a part of the task force, and my colleagues on the task force can speak as well to this, we're in the process of developing, and I think we're pretty close to being done with it, a survey that's pretty overall encompassing, that really takes an opportunity to try to measure the impacts that this police department has, not just on residents, but to community members outside this city. We're taking some great efforts to make sure that folks, both in our youth here in this community, outside this community, just community members outside of our actual city borders, are part of the survey as a effort to try to get feedback and get some insights to different perspective on any of those impacts that this police department has had. And then just speaking to it on a greater note, I would say in short that I think the impact and the service and the engagement and the relationship this police department, and quite frankly, any police department should have with members of their community shouldn't differ based on where they live and when they cross a Culver City boundary, an LA boundary. That engagement, that philosophy of how we go forward with policing, our engagement approach, our professionalism should not be impacted by where someone lives. And I would, the goal, at least from the police department standpoint, is to work to a place where the impacts that we have, hopefully positive impacts that we have, are felt equally across the board, whether you're a Culver City resident, Mar Vista Gardens resident, or so on and so forth. So the goal is to move forward to a place where our philosophy, our approach, our engagement is equal to the people that we deal with here in this city or outside this city. But again, there's efforts being taken through that survey to try to be as inclusive as possible and kind of cast a wide net to get that perspective and that feedback from folks that not only live in this city, but outside the city, particularly when we're talking about our geographical boundaries are only 5.5 square miles, less than that actually. And we are now more than ever, not only a drive-through destination, we are a destination city. So a lot of our interactions of folks that come to the city aren't necessarily residents, they're visitors, they're business goers, so on and so forth. So it's absolutely important, and we are making those efforts to try to get that input and that perspective.
I'd just like to, Chief Sid, we can certainly help you with that at $1 Million Hoods. We've been working with your data team, and if we can get some more comprehensive address data, we will be able to help you do an evidence-based analysis and a more pinpointed analysis of what sort of community members maybe have been contacted through arrest in the last year or so. So we would be happy to work with you to do an evidence-driven analysis of non-TC residents who have been impacted and who we may want to reach out to.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Chief and Kelly. I think next we have Deborah Weinrock.
Hey, Serena?
Yes, hi, Deborah.
Okay, as long as you can hear me. Good evening, everybody. My sole focus of my comments and questions tonight is the draft survey. In my opinion, and strictly my opinion, the survey needs some reconsideration. Firstly, it's too detailed and time-consuming for residents to answer. Next, if we are looking at serious defunding, then there is one primary focus that needs to be addressed in the survey. Have you, Mr. or Miss Resident, personally experienced or witnessed any activity on the part of any CCPD officer that made you conclude it was an act of racial profiling and or improper use of force? If so, when, where, who, how, and what? And also, are you aware of the policies, philosophies, and programs CCPD already has in place and those that are in the CCPD pipeline to address your experiences and beliefs? I need to point out that we are all entitled to a presumption of innocence innocents, even police officers, and after reading thousands of police reports as an anti-incarceration prosecutor, defense attorney, and judge pro tem, the reality is that the overall majority of the defendants charged in those reports actually committed the crimes. As Councilmember Small explained, we have to get this right. So is it possible to rethink, revise, and reduce the survey with input from CCPD before the survey is launched?
Thank you, Deborah. So I'll take the question first. The survey that Ms. Weinrock is referencing is the community survey that I mentioned at the outset of our presentation. So Ms. Weinrock is a part of the Chiefs Advisory Panel, and they received a draft copy of the survey. As I mentioned, the survey has not been finalized or released as of yet. And the other statement that she made about the length of the survey, it is a lengthy survey. Also, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's serving kind of three purposes for the project team, not only for the review of the public safety services and potential reallocation, but also informing the use of force policy, as well as providing information on the public safety element for the general plan update. And the survey will be available on the city's webpage probably by Monday at the very latest. And also, just one other point I wanted to respond to. The Culver City Police Department has been involved in the development of the survey through Chief Sid, who's part of this overall committee. And I'm not sure if Chief Sid or Saul, if either of you want to respond to this as well.
So I don't know if you have anything. I don't really have too much more to add to that than what Serena touched on. Obviously, the survey has been a collaborative effort with all the staff members, the consultants, obviously the CAP group. It's an undertaking of a task to be able to take such a loaded topic that we're trying to evaluate and address and get it all into one survey, particularly with so much input, all valuable, and try to make selections of what we want to get in there, what's the best way to present it. It's certainly an imperfect document, but again, well-intended, and obviously trying to get what we can in there to be as valuable. And then an important piece of the process, but just that one piece of the process. And I really think it's worth mentioning that this entire process is all that. It's getting perspectives, getting data, getting input, both residents, outside community members, so on and so forth. It's all part of Dr. Hernandez's presentation. They're all just pieces of the pie, if you will, and putting together, as a part of this process to ultimately put forth, hopefully, some information, some insights, some perspective to the city manager's office to come back with some recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. And I think that's an important point to emphasize, that all of these different measures are just another way for us to gather different perspectives, opinions, and information. So the public meeting tonight is one aspect of that. Meeting with the Chiefs Advisory Panel and getting their input and feedback is another way. Meeting with the other community groups that I mentioned is another avenue, as well as the community survey. These are all just different pieces to the puzzle that will hopefully inform a good recommendation to the City Council at the end of the 90 days.
I would just echo the last thing I'll just say, affirming both of those positions is, the wisdom in the City Council's configuration here is that you have the chief on the panel and the ability to analyze this with folks that are external to the department, whose area of focus is a different lens, right? I'm not an expert in policing. My work is around racial equity and social justice. And the CPSM team is definitely expert on what police staffing and efficiencies look like, where there are areas that of inquiry that we should begin with. And luckily we have a local resident who's also a scholar of these questions. I think that the real gift of this structure is how we engage each other in using the various lenses that we have to interpret the data that's coming back. And in terms of feeling heard, I would like to just emphasize what the chief is saying what Serena's saying, which is there are multiple pathways to ensure that the perspective that you have around some of the key questions that are on the table are in fact heard clearly through, whatever construction of a particular question tonight. If it wasn't expansive enough to what you really need to say or want to learn more about, please leave it here on the chat. Other ways to do it is to use the project website and the project email to send in your thoughts along the way, and to keep an open mind as we move into discussions with finance committees, with the GARE committee, and other committees that are going to be bringing to bear their expertise. And with that, I just want to do a time check just out of respect for everybody's time. We do have a timeline pointing out what some of those future steps are and where you can participate next and get additional information. So Serena, if you're comfortable with that, you can let me know if you want to take an additional question, or if we can move to that and have the folks waiting to do what I've described, to make sure that we don't leave here without getting your question into the chat or email it to us.
Saul, I see 2 additional hands raised. Do you want to get to these 2 individuals and then go to the closing? Okay, perfect. So next I have Salam Alim. And we'll go ahead and unmute you and give you 1 minute as well. Salam Alim, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead and speak.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Why is Culver City Police Department administration are not held to the highest standard of discipline? Like, for example, the police are marking on innocent citizens like me, their identity, such as the name or their badge number, which is very important. And then the professional standard manager of all people, he hung up a phone on me. A professional standard manager hung up a phone. How do we hold the others responsible? To find out this information for today, officer brought up. So this is really uncalled for. Also, I feel like giving a promise to the citizens and then not keeping a citizens' promises, what they give us promises, is uncalled for. Are they supposed to do their job? How? I'll call your supervisor and stuff, then they will take care of things. Example, the homeless issues that was found in my apartment.
Thank you, Ms. Alim. That concludes your 1 minute. And we have 2 additional hands, so I will go to one calling user, and then the final question will come from Donna. So next I have phone number with the prefix area code 774306, and I will unmute you.
This question is for Ms. Hernandez. You earlier indicated none of this data is different than other cities around us. So how does this data suggest that we should specifically defund the Culver City Police Department by 50%? And do you believe we should defund the Culver City Police Department by 50%?
So, using the $1 Million Hoods method, we performed the typical analysis that we run with police data, and the results were quite similar. There are racial disparities. People who are perhaps unemployed are, most impacted. Young people are most impacted. So it does look pretty similar to what's happening across the country. Your second question is much more about my own political position on these issues of this moment. And I've seen in the chat some quotes from my Twitter and different social media and all of that. So I will speak very frankly and clearly with my neighbors, friends, and to build with everybody. From the story that I laid out as a historian who has spent 20 years speaking and thinking and researching and writing on mass incarceration and racial justice and injustice in the United States, it is very clear to me that we are living in the new Jim Crow, that this is a long history, a legacy that we are grappling with, that the Black freedom struggle is far from over. Every community in this country must have to figure out how to reckon with it. And so, yes, I am an abolitionist in that movement. We needed to abolish slavery. We needed to abolish Jim Crow. And yes, we need to think very radically, expansively, creatively about how we're going to transform our relationships to one another to find a new way of living in peace, in justice, in dignity, and safety for all of us. So yes, I am an abolitionist. And if you want to be, I'll be very clear about my politics on that. The data analysis is almost separate and apart, right? It is very clear that these patterns are persistent across the country. So we all as a community, as Culver City, and I so deeply respect and admire my neighbors. I love living in this community. I feel embraced by my own local neighborhood here. I have great faith that we can work together to really be innovative, creative, and most important, bold about what comes next.
Thank you. And we'll go to the last speaker, Donna.
Hi, I assume you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So my question is, although it's pretty specific, the more I think about it, I realize that it's trying to approach really the whole question of problem solving. And in particular, what I'm asking this about is in the schools, having armed police officers to approach students who are having who knows what kind of problems. It's very intimidating. It approaches it immediately from punishment, fear, and intimidation. I have been a student of problem solving for most of my life. I've been an RN for 50 years, and problem solving was a main part of my job. I don't understand why the approach to, especially with our students, why the approach would be to walk up with a gun on your hip and expect these students to feel okay about talking to you. They won't. I can promise you. Not that I have a big bank account, but I bet my bank account. So that's my basic question. It's specific to our schools, but I think it actually encompasses this whole issue, is how are we approaching problem solving? I don't think with punishment. That's it.
Thank you. And so that concludes the last of the speakers, and I don't see any questions in the chat. I'll take another quick look through it.
Thank you.
As we transition to the final slides.
Yeah, I just want to be respectful of people's time. We're at 8:10, and so I just wanted to make sure that we had some time to describe next steps. And I really just appreciate the framing of the last question. We are being asked by the City Council to take a problem set, to take a puzzle set around how to align racial justice. We heard some clear disparities in the arrest rates of particularly young Black and Brown folks. And we have leadership that is prepared to lean into, on the council and at the police department, prepared to lean into this question of what are the steps towards a different way, as Dr. Hernandez said, that we can relate to each other and to infractions, the actions that are deemed as infractions. And we're not going to get around the hard work of talking to each other. And everything that a city manager's office is charged to do is about looking at emerging best practices, existing best practices, looking at things that might not even be a best practice yet, but coming up with it together. And so this is the intention around all of the steps that the city manager's office is putting in here, so that we can, in good faith, hear what are the various ways of solving issues of community safety and racial inequity and injustice at the same time. And so with that, I just want to highlight the next step is, as was mentioned, there's a community survey that the CAP team members, all of us on the technical team, others looking at the general plan update have helped to construct. And that will be circulated, as Serena said, on Monday, as early as Monday, and it will stay open as an online survey till September the 8th. And here's another opportunity for folks to help us with the distribution, right? The broader and most diverse places that this can travel, the better. And again, a survey is not a referendum. It is not going to be an up or down or a yes or no. It's really asking for more detail and input from folks all around the community, and in this case, even outside of it, because this is one area of city services that touches so many lives of people who don't live in Culver City, but who are impacted by its services. So we invite you to help with the distribution, and just to point people to the project website to be able to access that link. After that, there's going to be another meeting on September 17th. This is another public with the Chief Advisory Panel, the General Plan Advisory Committee, and the Government Alliance on Race and Equity team. These are folks in your city government who have been committed to and trained in various ways of looking at information from an equity lens. And their job, and all of our job on that night, is to review the survey results or what we have back from the survey at the time and discuss potential police department operational changes, costs of, as was mentioned, there are specific examples, pieces of the work. How much does it cost? And could it be something that could be handled by a different agency? Questions like this. And it's very important that we stick with this conversation and ensure that your voice is part of that discussion as well. On September 24th, we have another public meeting like this one with the Chief Advisory Panel and the Finance Advisory Committee, the city's Finance Advisory Committee, which is another body that has already been impaneled. It's not specific to this question, but its job is to review and analyze data collected to look at potential fiscal concerns. And we're going to have that conversation where we also interface with them around the equity concerns and looking at fiscal impacts of potential changes, the fiscal impacts of the current approach. How much does it cost us to respond per call? How much does it cost us for the current configuration of services? And what are some models that could actually achieve, ideally, the goal of saving us costs and also increasing community safety for everybody who's touched by the department. On October 12th, the City Council has the next City Council meeting that would be after the 90-day deadline, where the recommendations would be heard that the City Manager's Office would finally craft as a result of all of these steps is on that day. And obviously, the City Council meeting is to review and discuss the proposed recommendations for any public safety reallocation options, ideas, and the synthesis of all of this amazing work that you folks are doing in this city. So we just wanted to highlight that, ask you to mark your calendars and let you know that this is the beginning and we want you to stick through it all the way through the council meeting. With that, Rina, do you want to do this closing slide?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to call your attention to the project website that I've been referencing. It's listed here. The URL is listed here. On this webpage, you will be able to follow the project through all of these presentations that you've seen tonight, as well as the meeting agendas and presentations that we have had with the Chiefs Advisory Panel. That is listed there as well, in addition to other resource information. There's also an email that's dedicated to this project. The email address is publicsafety.review@culvercity.org. Once the community survey is up and ready to go. It will be placed on the Public Safety Project Review webpage. It will also be sent out via Gov delivery, and we will send out printed hard copies as well. So please look for that Gov delivery announcement, or you can go onto the webpage and grab the link from there as well. You will be able to submit the community survey electronically. If you or someone else receives a hard copy of the community survey, they can drop that completed survey off at any of the drop boxes at City Hall. And they can also leave written comments if they would like, also in that drop box at City Hall. And finally, the next meeting, as I will mention, is September 17th at 6 p.m. And you will get a Gov delivery about that as well. And I hope that you all join us. We appreciate all of the very diverse comments and perspectives.
Thank you, Serena, and thank everybody for being here tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night. Thank you to our speakers as well.
Thank you very much, all of you who put this together.
Thank you, Saul. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.